Hi, today is July 14th, 2021. My name is Tatiana Zaytseva. Here again in Natural Pigments we are it's AMI, Artist Materials Advisor. And so today we will talk about painting on copper. But before we talk about this, I need to have a couple announcements. And so first one, again, remember, if you ever took our classes from 2012 in person or online, so please join us on last Saturday of the month. This month will be on July 29th, I believe. So please join us because George will answer any of your questions. So what after class you are interested or you have any problems. So every last Saturday of the month we wait you on paintingbestpractices.com. So that's please register with group cohorts and so of the painting best practices, and that and we will reroute you immediately to our sessions. So today, this week is so busy. We will have a lot of announcements today, and so today please pay attention many things. And so we were very busy, so then we were not ready to prepare for next week Georgia's studio tips. So instead of next week, we will have on July that's July 28th. So please, if you register already on July 21st, it will be on July 28th. So just be prepared for that. So today, after our session, as always, we will announce the discount code for the copper, but that would be on the end of the session. So today, as last time, so last month we were talking about Artefex panels and we were excited, and so then we had a lot of people writing us and asking a lot of questions, and of course pop up the question about copper. And so that's why we today making that session specifically about copper. Please have your questions just about copper. If you have questions about ACM panels, so then we can answer next time. So again, I am happy to introduce you to two co-founders of the Artefex company, George O'Hanlon and Anton O'Hanlon.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, I'm George O'Hanlon, and Anton is to my left, I guess, on screen here. He's actually talking from Artefex Central Headquarters. We wanted to talk about painting on copper today, and specifically we're going to, and Anton is going to be specifically talking about copper composite materials, or CCM, which is, of course, a specialized form of copper. But I'll just mention briefly a little bit of history about copper, painting on copper. It was very popular between the 16th, 18th century in Europe. And one of the reasons, perhaps, why it was very popular was because in the 15th century, the printing plates, or printing was invented. So copper plates became readily available. And when things become readily available, then it makes it much easier for other industries and other craftsmen to use this. And so artists started painting on that. There was also some interest in the preciousness of certain materials. And there was a very big interest in this, especially during the 16th and 17th centuries. But painting on copper had a lot of advantages, and we'll talk about those. What I did want to mention, Anton is going to be talking about the preparation of copper today, but the preparation of copper back then differed somewhat, and some of the early treatises, and we know from examining them, that they prepared copper in a way that made it easier for them to paint. And some of the treatises talk about, of course, they all talk about rubbing the copper surface with like pumice or ash, wood ash, to abrade the surface. That's just to kind of create more surface area and open up. Also, it removed any oxidation on the copper, which was also important. So that was a good thing that they did back then. They also, it's also recorded in treatises that they rubbed garlic juice on there. We don't recommend that today, but the main purpose of that was to add a little bit of tackiness to the surface, which might have made it a little bit easier to paint with. It isn't like what most people think. It's like improving adhesion or making it adhesive, or garlic juice acted as an adhesive. None of those things really about that. It's just that they allowed it to dry a little bit or get tacky, and then they can paint on that surface, and it just allowed the brushwork to be a little bit easier. We don't need to do that today, and Anton will explain some of that. So some of the preparation back then is interesting, but not necessary today. And the aesthetics of copper, of course, are great, and we'll get into that in just a moment. And we see copper paintings from back then, and they're absolutely in pristine condition if they were cared for. And if they weren't cared for, they're in terrible condition. And so that's one of the points about copper. Copper can be your best friend, or it could be your worst enemy or nightmare. Because if the painting is not cared for properly, if it's not, if it doesn't get exposed to high humidity and acid environments, the painting will last for generations. But if it gets exposed to high humidity and acid environments, then it will just absolutely become ruined. And so that's one of the things to always keep in mind about copper. So I'm going to let Anton take it over here, and he'll talk about copper and also CCM, or copper composite material.
Thank you, George. Yeah, one of the things this morning I was looking up the relative humidity in Florida, the average relative humidity in Florida. I was a little surprised to see that it's 80% relative humidity on average there right now. So just going back to what you're saying is that it could be your best friend, it could be your worst friend. If you don't protect it from certain environmental changes, you could run into problems, which I'll talk about. I think the natural place for us to start with about copper panels specifically would be just to show you some of the different possibilities for painting on copper, and then kind of showing what Artefex and why we specifically landed on the CCM, which is the copper composite material. As you notice, it's kind of similar to ACM, which is aluminum composite material. CCM is the same basic idea as aluminum composite material, but instead of aluminum polyethylene core aluminum, it's going to be aluminum polyethylene core copper veneer. So that's basically what this CCM and copper stands for. But let me kind of show you some of the other possibilities that are out there. For instance, I have a painting that I got from an artist. I really enjoy her work. She paints on copper. Her name's Patricia Rice. She paints on a copper plate. She now mostly uses Artefex copper composite panels, but she still has this as an older painting. So this is a possibility of what you could paint on copper. This is a very thin veneer of copper. People usually just buy it in rolls, and you can cut it. The problem with this is of course, when you cut it, it kind of has some sharp edges. It's also, as you can see, it's not very flat. And as in with all metals, aluminum, copper, you can't really, once you bend it, you can't really bend it back. What you're doing is basically rebending it again. So instead of having it like this, now it's going to be like this, and then you're going to have kind of try to make a straight surface, but you really can't once you start bending it. So that's one of the options that you can have. Another option is, of course, buying it in like a copper coil. This is a copper coil. You could buy it. This is very thin veneer, and you can mount that to wood, which is also what I've seen.
That has to be mounted on something and maintained rigid. So yeah, that's an extra work on that.
That's right. That's right. Now, I mean, the veneer itself is copper, so it's the painting surface itself is the copper, but unfortunately, you have to go through quite a bit more steps to make it usable. Now, we've done this before, and I've actually tested this out quite a bit. I'm going to show you a little bit later on some of the tests that we have for that, but that's an option there. Now, all those things are copper, so just as thinking of painting on it, like a copper composite panel like this, they're all painting on copper. Okay. One of the things that you need to worry about is if you're looking around for other source of copper, let's say it's cheaper or whatever, is an anodized surface that looks like copper. Now, just looking at it, you really can't tell if it's copper or not. But as soon as you scratch off the top of the surface, you notice that it's actually aluminum. Okay, so this is pretty common, and in fact, there's lots and lots of different veneers and surfaces that say it's copper or natural copper, but in fact, it's not going to be actually copper, and it's going to be some kind of anodized surface on top of it. That's something you don't want to paint on. So just as a beginning of that, just to show you some of the ranges of different copper panels, you could see here. This is not the kind that we use, but this is the same kind of idea. These are all just paints that go on top of your aluminum. If you notice, there's a copper surface right here. So none of these are suitable for painting, but they're out there. And these are some things that you might find out there that might be cheaper or something like that. But they're not. This is not what you would consider copper.
It's not really copper, so it's not going to have any of the benefits of painting on copper, which we'll get into a little bit more.
That's right. And most importantly, you probably would have, now, once again, I haven't tested these specific products, but you could have problems with adhesion. And so when either Natural Pigments or Artefex recommends any products, our goal is to increase the longevity of your work. And so we do extensive testing for adhesion, delamination, different problems that could come up over time if you're painting on things that haven't been tested. So those are some of the options there. Let me show you one more before I move on to showing what the specific copper Artefex panels are. This is a competitor panel, copper panel. Okay, so this is just a solid copper veneer. It's a little thicker. It's much heavier, but it's still, as you could kind of tell, it's still flexing a little bit. Something like this is about 1 pound and 12 ounces. This is a 9 by 12 inch panel. Okay, I want you to keep that in mind. A 1 pound and 12 ounces for a 9 by 12 inch panel. Now I'm going to show you what an Artefex copper panel is. As you can see, the back of it is an aluminum veneer. On the side, it's a sandwich, just like the ACM panels we saw last time, with a polyethylene core. And then there's a copper veneer on this end right here. Now this panel is 12 ounces. So it's less than half of what a copper panel like that will weigh. And in addition, because of the polyethylene core and the aluminum, it's very sturdy.
It's absolutely rigid. Yeah.
Very rigid. Yeah. And actually, I have an example of a really large panel here. So this is a copper panel. I believe this is a 30 by 36 inch panel. I'm gonna stand up really quickly to show you the size of this thing. Okay. So they're rigid even at large sizes, which is really one of the biggest problems with.
Just to let people know that the copper surface is being protected by that plastic sheet.
Yes.
You didn't see any copper there.
Yes. So they all have plastic protective sheets until they're finally put into a bag, and that actually goes along with what we're going to talk about preparing and cleaning. And we have a video ready for you to showing you about the preparation of the copper itself. So that's what the copper composite Artefex panel is that it has a copper veneer just like some of these other materials, but it has a backing on it to give it rigidity and to make it a little bit more lightweight. So now that we know kind of the beginnings of what to look for when we're working on copper and have different things, we have the main surface we have now is a natural copper, which is basically what you see here, what you saw everywhere. It's kind of a shinier surface, reflective. We have a lot of artists that really, really like that. And they use that as a feature for their artwork where maybe they'll leave some of the copper exposed and then paint around that and then have some of that copper shine through. Another common technique is to sand the entire surface to get rid of the sheen, to give it a little bit more surface tension. Kind of what some
surface area, a little more tooth.
A little bit more tooth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like you mentioned garlic a little bit earlier, where that's not something that we particularly recommend. Though we don't have anything specifically to say negative about it. It's not some, as a general rule of thumb, you don't want to be adding more and more different chemicals to your painting surface. You want to keep it as kind of as basic as possible. That usually increases longevity. So you can sand the surface to give it a little bit more tooth. And we used to offer a product which we've currently discontinued, where we sandblast at the surface. That is something that you could do as well. You could either sandblast or sand it yourself to get rid of that sheen. And what that does, once again, it adds a little bit of tooth to it, and allows you to deposit a little bit more paint. Something you're going to have to make sure, and that's actually in the video you'll notice that we'll show you later about copper preparation, is that when you sand it, it's very important to get rid of any particles or anything off the, especially if you're using like a sanding mat or something like that, to get rid of any of the particles that are on top of the surface, because that could oxidize the panel over time. So it's very important to clean off any the copper panel before you start painting on it, after you're sanding it or anything like that. So that's one preparation. You can get your panels ready. The one that's recommended, actually, that the old masters always used, is that they would cover the entire surface of the copper with either lead oil ground or a layer of like a lead oil paint or something like that.
In fact, that's what we see when we look at most of the paintings out there. They were all primed, usually with white, lead white. They might have added some colors to it, but generally, yeah, they're all primed. Today, I know a lot of artists want to just paint directly on it without any kind of priming. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but we do recommend priming the surface.
Yeah, and in fact, we do have some artists that even will do like an outline or an underpainting, or just of an idea of where they're going to actually paint and where they're going to leave exposed, and then they'll actually prime that paint. That's the part of the panel that they're going to paint. So there's different options, and the one thing I'll say about of course the best practice is to cover the entire copper panel with lead oil ground for longevity. If you're not going to do that, it is extremely important that you varnish the copper panel. Okay, and that's actually the next thing I want to show. We have an example. This is a preliminary test. We're actually doing an extensive test where we're doing a little bit more in depth and doing a little bit more different kinds of varnishes. But this is a test that we did about 5 years ago, where we took a copper panel, we put it actually down like this, face up, so rain and dirt and dust would all fall directly onto the copper panel. And where you can see here, these stripes right here, this is where there's no varnish put on at all. Now, of course, in your house, in your painting, this is not going to happen because this is directly rained on for 5 years. Okay, direct sunlight on this as well. So, but this is just an example, almost like an accelerated age test, showing that putting on a varnish really helps with oxidation. As you can see, these are 4 different varnishes. All 4 of these varnishes are offered by Natural Pigments. This is what we specifically tested with the copper panels. But it's really important to put the varnish on here to protect it, to protect the copper surface.
So those oxidized surfaces, those were completely bare, and keep in mind that exposed copper will oxidize naturally over time, and so even though that occurred probably within the first year of exposure, that panel I think has been out for at least 5 years.
At least 5 years, yeah.
And so so we can easily say that even in indoor, the copper will oxidize, it will darken if it's exposed. And covered with paint, of course, the paint acts as a protective layer to the copper. The copper will continue to oxidize underneath the paint layer, but the oxidation in this particular case is actually part of the process in which the paint bonds to the copper. The problem is when we get into patinas, where you get like a discoloration, like a blue-green or other types of discolorations. And we'll talk about that in a moment, because I know that tends to be pretty popular among some artists, and we'll talk about the ramifications of putting patinas directly on the copper plate and then painting on it.
It's a very popular subject. In fact, we get that question weekly. I have some examples. I did, sounds like a natural way of progressing into this part of the discussion on copper. We do get a lot of questions on patinas, and I wanted to show you some examples of what is out there that you can buy, but also what is out there that a lot of people themselves would make. So this is an example of what a company sells as a patinaed copper plate. Okay, this is actually on aluminum, so this is just a painted on surface. Okay, so it looks kind of like it's patinaed, but it's not actually patinaed copper. Okay, so that's one example. Obviously, this is not at all what you'd be looking for to paint on. Now this is a patinaed surface of copper. Okay, so this is actually a copper plate. Let me show you. So this is a copper veneer, and it's patinaed on here. This is, sometimes people are looking for this. Now, unfortunately, I think I'll have George elaborate on this specifically. But patinas, we can't really control once the oxidation process starts, and even if you leave any of the patina on there, we can't control for really anything. We really don't know how long it will take for it to deteriorate. We don't know how long it will take to fully oxidize to completely black, or maybe it won't do that. So really, I mean, if you're putting your artwork on it, unless it's designed to fall apart, which, of course, I know some artists do that, but I think a majority probably don't do that. So it's something to consider, that even though that might be part of what you want, the effect that you want to get, the patina is not something we can really control. And actually, on the back of this is a fully patinaed copper surface. Okay, so this is a fully oxidized surface. You see it's black. You can't really see any copper on here. I can tell the camera's quality is not great, but I can tell that it's still copper. You can kind of see some of the copper coming through there. But this is a completely black surface. Okay, now this is not naturally oxidized. They specifically oxidize this with a chemical to make it look dark like this. But that's an example of what a patina looks like. And so, George, I don't know if you have something to elaborate on patinas and anything like that.
So basically, what happens is okay. Basically, what happens is that these patinas that are induced chemically. Basically, this is a corrosion product, and it's induced chemically on these. Naturally, patinas do occur. The most common have been a kind of a bluish-green patina caused by an acid reaction, which essentially creates a copper carbonate. This will actually occur underneath a paint layer if the painting is exposed to an acid environment, in particular, and high humidity. So in those two cases, these patinas will occur. They could occur underneath a paint layer, and it will cause delamination of the actual painting. So that's why patinas are really troublesome. Now, what some people do is they may do a chemical patina on a part of the panel and then paint on the other part. The one and the thing that we have to advise very carefully about this is that you need to, whatever chemical treatments you do on the panel, you need to wash it off completely, and if possible, neutralize this. So these, it's not a simple thing. Even though they sell these kits that you can easily do this, the one thing that we're always fearful of, and there's actually not a lot of data or studies done on this, but it is believed that the patinas can actually creep. If you have a patina adjacent to a paint layer, it might actually creep under the painting itself. It may continue, especially if some of the chemical is not thoroughly removed from the surface. So we really don't recommend doing patinas in conjunction with a painting just because of that. But if you do decide to do that, then you need to take extra precautions to remove any of the chemicals neutralize the surface and make sure the surface is very clean before you proceed with, and of course you need to do that before you paint, not after you paint. So there need to be a certain process that you're going to have to do to enable that. But there's no guarantee that that patina will stay put and will not start to creep underneath the painting itself. So always keep that in mind, if you do decide to do something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
To interrupt you a little bit, guys.
I know I turned up the sound as much as I
Okay.
can. Yes.
Okay, I hope it will.
Yeah, we
fix
have a
now.
little. Maybe my sound is a little bit, and they're hearing Anton fine. I can see that. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I've turned it up a little bit, and hopefully that does it. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other things that I can kind of go over. I'm not sure. I'm sure there's quite a bit of questions, so I know we need to get to those. But another thing to think about the difference about the copper composite panels compared to some of the other panels. These copper composite panels can be cut fairly easily. I know with something like this, you can just cut it with snips. But every time you cut it with snips, then you're kind of running into troubles with possibly bending the surface, and then it goes back to what I said again when you're trying to rebend the whole thing. So with these copper composite panels, you can actually score them and cut them, which is something that if you ever have questions or run into something, we can show a little bit more detail on that. And we're actually going to be coming out with a video specifically showing how to resize paintings, because I do know that a lot of artists would buy a certain size, and then through the composition stage.
Is it as easy to cut the CCM, the copper composite material, as it is ACM? Because I know it's a little bit thicker.
It is, yeah. So the copper composite panel is 4 millimeters thick, and the ACM panel is 3 millimeters thick. Let me grab an ACM panel here just to show for reference here. This is an ACM panel, okay, with a lead priming on top of it, and this is a copper panel. So you can see it's a little thicker. It's about 1 millimeter, 25% thicker. Now that is mostly in the polyethylene core. It's not really in the aluminum and the copper. So the copper is a very soft metal, so it's fairly easy to cut through the copper. And then the polyethylene core is a plastic. So in terms of how hard it is to cut either one, they're basically very similar, because the thickness of the aluminum, thickness of the copper is about the same, and they're both fairly malleable to cut. You're not gonna. I will say you're not gonna get the same surface that you're gonna get from when we send it to you. We have special cutters that cut it at a certain angle that don't give it a divot or some of the little rough spots that you might have when you're cutting at home. But all those things can be mitigated, especially if you're putting a frame on or something like that, or if it's just one of those final cuts. It's not something you're doing every day. It's just something you have to resize. So you're not going to get quite the same cut as when you get it from us, but it is possible to cut it pretty easily with household items that almost everyone has at home.
Since you already talk about environment, guys, for two of you questions. So there no copper painting in New York.
No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about copper, the paintings on copper that would be exposed to both high humidity and acid environments. Now, acid environments occur outdoors, so definitely don't want to have any of these paintings outdoors. And there may be certain inside or interior environments where they could be exposed to some kind of acid or chemicals that got sprayed onto it. There was a post recently in our Painting Best Practice group in Facebook where a cat sprayed urine, and of course that can be very acidic. That could form acid products. So there's a lot of ways to do that, but generally there are lots of copper paintings in New York. If you just go to the Met or the Frick, you'll see copper paintings there, and they're in wonderful condition. So we're talking about they do fare better in controlled environments. If you're in an uncontrolled environment in Florida where you get continuous, like 80 to 90% humidity for large periods of time, it could be a problem. So what we do recommend, of course, is varnishing and make sure that the copper is not exposed to the painting. So paintings on copper should be varnished. They were historically, and so we know that many of them are in good condition, but when they were in the wrong conditions, they are in terrible shape. So that's just something to keep in mind for any artist wishing to paint on copper.
So Michelle, Anton will show later how to exactly to do this, how to prevent. And Anton, here's the question for you: what is the largest reasonable size for copper composite panel you have?
Yeah, I mean, it's depends. Really depends on if you're trying to frame it, if you're trying to brace it. If you're not trying to brace it at all and you're just want a copper panel, I'd say a 40 inch by 40 inches is what I would reasonably say is going to be rigid enough to paint on. That's not to say that you can't just buy a 4 foot by 8 foot panel, which is the biggest one we've sold. And in fact, we've made 4 foot by 8 foot panels. We put them on bracing. We've actually sold a 36 by 90 inch panel that someone was just putting straight into a frame. So that's the dimensions that they wanted. So it really would depend. But if you're not looking to frame it, if you're not looking to brace it, 40 inches by 40 inches is the biggest that I would go, and that I would feel comfortable knowing that I'm not going to get it back because of some problem that could have happened down the road with someone put it up against the wall.
Excuse me. Just to be clear, Anton is talking about bracing, not because these panels warp. They don't warp like they do like wood, but the issue is when you get up to a certain size, about 30 to 40 inches in any direction, the panel could sag under its own weight. So if you leaned it up like against a wall, it might sag a little bit. So if you put it in a frame, or if you any size larger than that, put it in a frame, or just put some simple bracing on the back side just to prevent it from sagging. No warping, it's not going to warp. That's one of the advantages of both ACM and copper composite material, or CCM, doesn't warp at all, and especially with any changes in the environment. And Anton, why don't you address that issue in regards to copper compared to, let's say, wood and stretched canvas? So specifically compared to stretched canvas and wood, copper won't warp just because it's exposed to high relative humidity or acids, right? The problem with copper, if it's exposed to those things, is that it could oxidize. But the good thing is it will never warp. And that's actually something that we're doing some testing on right now, both with ACM panels and CCM panels, where we have stretched canvas and wood panels and a whole range of different wood material products, where we're raising relative humidity to Florida levels, basically dropping it down to Santa Fe, New Mexico levels, and then doing that multiple times until we see a change. And in fact, the changes that we've seen happened within 3 days. Which is really, really, really crazy to think about, because it's not like we're exposing some of these panels to anything outside of what a normal condition would be in Florida, or even New York or Minnesota, somewhere where relative humidity can be really high. So in our preliminary test, our personal test. Now, of course, there's lots of tests that these companies did it themselves, but in our preliminary test, it's shown that there's absolutely no warping or expansion or contraction due to changes in the environment with both the copper and the aluminum composite material panels. One of the things I did want to kind of touch on about the varnish, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more, but it's really important, and I really want to stress this because we have had some artists come back to us with some problems. I really want to stress that there's almost all varnishes will work on the copper. The best one that we suggest is the Rublev acrylic varnish, specifically designed for copper. But the problem or the feature of that one is that you don't want to varnish until 6 months after
after you paint it, after the paint is dried. And I know that that's something as on the painting best practices, on Rublev, on natural pigments, and on Artefex, we always say that. And unfortunately, that's not always something that's possible to do for every artist, especially if they have a commission that they have to get out. But it is really important. I want to stress to everybody, all 100 people there, at least here that I see, is that you don't want to varnish on copper. And that's because copper is a non-absorbent surface. Okay, so on top of how long paint will take to dry, but if you varnish before 6 months on copper, you run a really high risk of delamination because the paint isn't actually going through any pores like in a canvas or anything like that, going deeper and having mechanical adhesion. It doesn't have that process, so you really need to make sure that the paint is really dry before you varnish it. So that's just something I want to address. Going back to the last question, is that it's really important to remember that you need to varnish the copper panel, but don't varnish it before 6 months, especially with the Rublev acrylic varnish.
Yeah, and since you're talking about that, Anton, Anthony asked a question: is there any kind of clear coating that you can apply to the bare copper before painting, or is it to avoid any issues if the painting does end up in an acid or humid environment?
So I know that Rublev makes a product called the Copper Rinse that's designed to protect or clean off any of the surface that you could paint on afterwards. You could do and I think what I understand is that some old masters and some actually people now would actually use oleo gel and cover the entire surface with a layer of oil to protect it a little bit. That's a possibility, but the best practice that I understand is number one, cover the entire surface with a lead or ground. Number two would be just to varnish the whole surface afterwards to protect it. Oxidation won't happen especially if it's in an environment like it's in your house, it's not outside. Relative humidity is between 40 and 50 or something like that. Your panel is not going to just oxidize just by sitting there like that very quickly. Okay?
So let's just to be clear with what Anthony is asking, we don't recommend any kind of coating on the copper prior to painting, because then you lose the benefit of the copper itself. What we do know is that there is a chemical interaction between the copper and of course the paint, the oil paint. So oil paint is very reactive with copper, and in fact, what's interesting is if you put a very thin layer, let's say an oil ground or lead white or onto a copper panel, you'll notice that as it dries, it may develop a kind of a green tint. And that's actually copper ions coming off the panel itself and migrating up into the paint layer. That's a good thing. Obviously, as soon as you put another layer on, that you won't see that green tint. It's not really an issue for you if you do see that. Not all the time do you see that, but we've noticed that on certain types of copper alloys, and we see it immediately form upon drying. So paint on the surface, like Anton recommended, you could just rub the surface with oil. And that doesn't necessarily protect the surface, but what it does is it just simply gives you some tooth or something to paint into, whether it's wet or tacky. And then what Anton mentioned about copper rinse, that's something that we developed. And basically what it does is it puts a chemical on there that becomes a polymerized form that tends to protect to some degree from oxidation. It gives some limited amount of protection. It's not totally permanent, but it does aid in that. So that could be something you could put on the panel prior to painting. And just follow the directions on the material. So it's called copper rinse. So that's a possibility there.
I know. So I'm looking at some of the questions. Some people asking acrylic gesso and clear gesso. Most clear gessos are acrylic gessos, which is water-based. this is something that we didn't mention, I guess, earlier, is that it is you absolutely cannot put any water-based paints on it. You can't use acrylics. You can't use watercolors. You can't use acrylic gessos on it. You can't use clear acrylic gessos on it. All those things are really going to expedite the oxidation process of the copper. So just to elaborate on that, there isn't anything specifically you could put on like a clear gesso or anything like that. But some of the things that George stated are a possibility. In terms of, as soon as the copper is made, it starts oxidizing. Okay, and I know I saw that Christina had a question about is it oxidizing? Yes, it's oxidizing right away. Okay, so as soon as the manufacturer, before it even gets to us, it's starting to oxidize. Now the process is really long, and is just being expedited by other factors like being exposed to relative humidity. What you want is to slow down that process over time, and that's by varnishing. So you're wanting to be in that sweet spot of where 6 months is recommended. Now this goes back to drying times, right? I mean, if you're in, let's say in New Mexico or California or something like that, you might get away with doing a little less. Now, I'm not going to recommend that, but I'm just giving you as an example. Drying times are different in each place. So that's one way of expediting that. Another way is of course maybe using a different kind of varnish. That's not the acrylic B44 varnish, which Rublev creates. There's another Rublev varnish that's the that I believe is the Rigorez varnish. That one it isn't quite as polarizing, and I don't know if you could talk on that a little bit.
Yeah. But basically, what we do recommend is, although there are some manufacturers that say you can apply varnishes much earlier, like when it's touch dry, we don't recommend that, because that assumes that all artists paint the same way. They apply the same colors, they apply it in the same fashion, and they use the same thickness of paint on the paint surface. That doesn't happen. So that recommendation may apply to fast drying colors painted very thinly on very fast drying surfaces. And copper does cause oil paint to dry faster, it's true, but you just have to keep in mind that sometimes you may use slower drying colors like alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue. Some types of siennas will dry quite slowly. So whereas you may think that they're drying rapidly, it isn't, and it may appear to be dried or touch dry. You put a varnish on it, and then things start to crack and fall off. So we really, again, we want to stress the fact: wait 6 months. That's a good rule of thumb. Wait a year if you could, because that's even better, because oil paint dries very slowly. So. And so you can protect the surface, and keep in mind that the normal oxidation for copper is, if it's not exposed to adverse environments, is going to be kind of a cuprous brown oxide oxidation. And so even under the paint film, it tends, if you think that you're going to see the shiny surfaces forever, that never happens, because as time goes on, this brown cuprous oxide, which is about the same color as copper itself, will continue to appear on the copper surface. The black cuprous oxides, of course, is what you saw in that one panel, and that was exposed outdoors, or in the case of actually someone wanting to make a patina like that of some sort. But that's a much slightly different form of oxidation. So most of the oxidation that you may experience will be of the brown variety. However, you do want to protect if you have bare surfaces, you do want to protect it. So wait the proper amount of time and then varnish. And there are some good varnishes. You can use any varnish on the oil painting that you would normally use. We do have a special varnish that, especially if you've got large areas of copper exposed, you may want to consider putting this varnish on, and it's called acrylic varnish. And even though I know a lot of people are confused because they say, how do you put acrylic varnish on an oil painting? Well, this is an acrylic varnish in a solvent, and it has very good affinity for oil paint, so you can use it. So, and this acrylic varnish is what they call the Acrylic type, and it's been tested for years on bare copper surfaces outdoors, and lasts many, many years outdoors. Again, there's no varnish that's permanent, that just doesn't exist. They will fail eventually at some point in time, but obviously if it lasts for many, many years exposed outdoors, it'll last quite a long time indoors. So that may be something to consider. And if you have very specific questions about your application, feel free to talk to Anton or myself after the session, but we're just kind of getting some general questions from you at this point in time.
I think we have one confused person. If you, Anton, please, can you just say like what started and how to pursue? So what's the preparation if needed? And so step 1, step 2, step 3.
Absolutely. And before
Maybe
I say
when you show that movie, is that?
That's what I thought. So then, okay,
No.
great. Okay, great. So then you have it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll do a quick explanation, but I'm gonna point you to either Natural Pigments or the Artefex copper page. On there, there is a good video. This video you can see today is on there. This kind of basically every panel is ready to paint on. It just depends on your how you want to pursue this. Like I said, first is painting directly on the bare aluminum. If you do that, it's really important to varnish. So beforehand, all you have to do is just make sure that there's no dust, no fingerprints, nothing else on the copper panel. You paint on it, you wait 6 months, then you varnish the entire thing, both the unexposed copper and the painted passages. Okay, number two over here. I'll use this hand instead. Number 2, okay, so you sand the whole surface, either sandblast it or just sand it with a 300 grit paper. It's really important to once again clean off the entire surface of the copper with alcohol. That's usually the easiest, as long as there's no clear oxidation. As long as you're not seeing brown spots or anything else on there, you can use alcohol, wipe it all off. I suggest a micro cloth, which just doesn't leave any residue or any like paper towel. Paper towels will leave little
Fibers,
little fibers on there. So if you use a microfiber cloth, it's gonna be much better. Clean it off with alcohol, paint wherever you need to paint on, then varnish the entire surface at least 6 months afterwards. Then your copper that way is protected. Number 3 is the best one. Is you cover the entire surface with a lead white or a lead oil ground. Okay. Then you paint when you need to paint on there. You wait 6 months and you varnish. Okay. The one that's the option number 3, that's going to be guaranteed, what I would say guaranteed for longevity. Okay, so that's going to be what we already have lots of examples of in every museum that you probably go to. There's copper plates that have been painted on like that. Now, 1 and 2 is protected with the varnish, but it is going to be we can't guarantee quite as much as completely covered with lead white. So that's the basic steps for each one. And then if you have further oxidation on any of them, this video will show you some of the ways to do that to deal with any of those things. So I wanted to answer one more question. About the fingerprints. Okay, and this is a really important one that I actually hear quite a bit. This is from Christina Dunziger again. She's asking, how do I clean it off before I varnish? Alcohol will take off any fingerprints. And it is really important that the oils on your fingers are not the same as the oils in your paints. Okay, these are not these are not the same oils. So if you get a fingerprint, don't just leave it there, because it could cause problems down the road. It's very easy to clean off. And what I always suggest, both if you're using lead white or if you're using copper panels, just in general, if you're painting, try to be as clean and organized as possible. Don't take out the copper panel out of the packaging before you have gloves on, or before you know exactly what you're doing. So don't take it out, handle it, put your fingerprints on it, get it dirty, put it away for a year, come back to it, do it again. So basically, just keep it as clean as possible before you start painting on it, and that's going to be your best practice. More with this particular surface than with any other one. You want to keep it as clean as possible, and if you can, if that's part of your practice, use gloves, and that's going to really protect you from any problems down the road. And whiskey is not good, David. Just gonna answer that. Don't clean it with whiskey.
Yeah, don't just use simple isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol. Don't use anything that's been perfumed, or don't use vodka or your favorite alcohols. It's simple alcohol, because anything else could leave a residue. That residue will cause problems later on down the road. So keep it simple. Okay, should we roll
Yes,
the tape?
please.
I've seen looking at some of the questions. I don't know if we have 2 minutes. I wanted to answer a couple more, if that's okay. One of the ones I saw is why painting on CCM or ACM panels if you're going to cover the whole thing with lead white? That looks like a couple of people had that question. So that's actually a great question. That's something that I think every artist should consider for themselves before they start painting. As old masters, they didn't have options like we do for aluminum composite material panels. They didn't have options for other metals that they were able to paint on. They really only had stretched canvas or wood products that they anecdotally understood would fail over time. So they used copper because they knew that it wasn't going to warp, and so for them they didn't use the copper as a feature. They just used it because they innately knew that it would last longer. So for you as an artist to decide whether you want to paint on copper, if you want to go all the way with copper and make it protect it the most and cover it with lead white, I would say it's going to be cheaper for you to just go with a different kind of panel, like a lead white panel, like an oleo panel that we make, or a linen panel that we make. You're going to have still the same options and still the same benefits of using composite material panels. Now, some people like to use it historically, and they like that idea. And so that's one of the reasons for use copper. And of course, the other one is more for like what I think Judy was saying. What a lot of our artists are saying is that they want to use the copper as a feature for their artwork, and so they want to have the copper show through. And so if that's the kind of artist you want, and that's what you want to see, that's a great way of using the copper, whether it is to show some of the copper through, or to have a connection to what historically Rembrandt and so many other artists used copper for as a really good surface that we have a lot of examples that have lasted throughout the years.
Yeah, what we're saying here is that we're saying what we see from history. We see that the artists that painted on copper almost always primed it and covered the entire surface. There are some examples where they didn't prime it; they just painted directly on the copper, and perhaps left some of the copper exposed or very thin layers of paint on the copper. So that was done, but it just wasn't done enough for us to give that kind of confidence and say, "Oh yeah, go for it. It's totally safe." However, we know artists will be trying those things, so you're totally welcome to try any of these things, even the patinas. We just give you those cautions and to be very careful because we don't want to see your works ruined in sometime in the future. So these are just precautions. These are best practices, but of course artists will do whatever they think, and we'll advise you on the best way to do whatever method. If you want to leave parts of the copper exposed, again, don't think that it will always have that shiny surface forever. That will go away. That's definite. It won't change too much color unless, of course, it's exposed to an acid environment. But putting a varnish on there will keep that pristine look for a lot longer than if you didn't varnish the painting. And I guess the question is, again, some people are confused what kind of varnishes you can use any varnish, any recommended varnish, that is varnishes that you would normally use on oil paintings. You could use that on
including gum sole. So if somebody was
Gamvar.
asking on
Gamvar.
cover.
Yeah. So you can use Gamvar, which is a Regal Res based varnish. And I know, Catherine, we will be sending our varnishes to Europe, so they will be available to you. Hopefully, we're gonna be able to do this by the end of the month. So we have to go through hoops with certain shipping regulations because they do contain hazardous materials, the solvents, that is. So just keep that in mind.
And the question about rabbit skin glue brand, it's all opposite. Rabbit skin glue should go before, and it's only on canvases. There's no way you can, or do you need on copper at all?
You don't want to do any water-based products on copper. So forget about acrylic paints, acrylic, clear, gesso, whatever you want to call that. Any kind of acrylic mediums. Acrylic varnishes that are not water-based, no problem. But
what about liquid?
Liquid, we don't have a lot of experience with alkyds, so you're going to be kind of on your own with that. We don't think there's going to be a problem with that, but we haven't done any tested with
Anton is doing a
alkyds.
lot of testing
Yeah.
with all Artefex materials and other materials, but it takes a lot of time, of course, and so then obviously sessions like that give us more ideas what do we need to do on future.
Yeah, and I saw Linda and I believe Dennis talking about painting thinly. Yes, we do have a lot of artists that use the copper panels in that way, where they use it almost as use the copper to shine through with almost like a toned surface. In that way, I would suggest we repost a lot of artists on our social media. So if you follow us on social media, you'll be able to see a lot of the artists. We also have some ambassadors and featured artists that talk about painting on copper, and they're very open to doing that. In fact, we're going to be part of the Vision X Live event, where I'm going to plug a couple things here, Tanya and George. So we're doing the Vision X Live, and one of the things that we're going to be talking about there is an in-depth discussion with Olga Kremon, who uses our copper panels quite extensively. She has a lot of experience on them, and she talks a little bit about how she uses them, how she uses the surface, and things like that. But I would say actually in the month of August on our social media, we're going to be featuring an artist who paints on our copper panels as well. And we had one in, let me see, another artist in March of last year, or this year. So if you go back and look through our social media posts, you'll notice that we have a featured artist where we go in depth with a specific panel, that artist, and then they talk about their experience, why they like using that particular panel, and how to use that panel. Specifically for your question would be copper. So
Anton and George will talk actually about Vision X specifically a little bit later. I do want you guys pay attention, specifically on this, but I still have a couple questions. So Cam asked about where locally we can buy in New York. Cam, specifically for you, please connect Anton. He specifically for your students and for your school, he will work. We know about you, we remember about you, we love you. So if you need something, we don't have anything in New York right now. So you're right, the local store was closed, and Natural Pigments sell Artefex, but if you do need big volume, so then you do need to connect Artefex specifically. Here's Laura, any specific special consideration about how to transfer a drawing to the copper panel before painting? George, that question probably for you.
To transfer a drawing?
Drawing, yes.
You could transfer a drawing. Let's say you can use the graphite method. That just basically, if of course you can just transfer the graphite, nothing else, like if you use some kind of paper that has wax on it or something like that, try to avoid that. But you can do a rubbing onto the copper with graphite. The graphite's not going to hold very well on that surface. What most artists do, of course, is that they transfer the drawing onto a priming on the copper. But if you want to paint on the bare copper, what a lot of artists do is they just start the painting outlining with paint itself. But you could do a rub-off method with graphite onto the copper surface, as long as you don't transfer, if you're not using any materials that transfer something else onto the copper. We just, again, just keep the copper as clean as possible is what we're trying to recommend here for best performance overall.
So here's the next question. Nancy is asking Anton, so how to prevent the dust falling on the copper?
You mean, and I'm reading the question. So that's during, after you already
After it's
painted.
painted.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can't put anything. Well, I honestly, I'm going to answer truthfully. I don't really know. I know that we have quite a bit of different ways of cleaning the copper with like a mini picture cleaning kit.
Let me just recommend just tent the copper painting. Just put a tent over it, like some kind of cloth that doesn't touch the painting surface, and it still allows some air circulation. You don't need like lots of air circulation. That's because this is not paint. Oil paint doesn't dry by evaporation. Just normal access to oxygen is plenty. So just tent it, and that'll keep the dust off. And while you're waiting for that paint layer to cure properly, to properly polymerize, and then take it out and then paint on it, and that will avoid having to clean the surface before you put the varnish on and all this kind of thing. So that's our best recommendation for that.
So we had the question before, and so we already talked about, and some pigments actually dries quite fast on the surface. So is there a possibility then, like if people will avoid oily paints, paint with mostly like lead paint and the iron oxides, for example. So is it possible to varnish early?
It is possible. There's always caveats to this. But that means you really, you want to understand, obviously, you want to understand your painting. So obviously, I mentioned a couple of colors like ultramarine blue that tends to dry a little bit slower. Another color like alizarin, some of your organic colors like quinacrinones, pyrols, dioxazine, those colors tend to dry very slowly overall. As opposed to inorganic colors like your iron oxides, your Mars, your ochres, certainly your umbers dry very quickly. Lead, of course, lead white dries very quickly, avoiding titaniums, which typically tend to dry very slowly. So yes, if you're using colors that tend to dry faster, certainly you may be able to varnish onto a copper painting much earlier. You paint in thin layers and so forth, and you don't use lots and lots of oil or medium in your painting. So those are things we're just saying. Again, we've seen disaster result with some individuals that rush the process. They do it within a couple of weeks or a month, and then all kinds of manner of things happen to the painting. We just don't want to see that. But we see it, we've seen it, and people come to us later and they say, it's your copper panel did this to me.
I do believe on painting.
It isn't the copper panel.
Yeah.
It is the paint layer. So
on painting best practices, you specifically show that oils on copper dry much faster.
Oil paint tends to dry much faster on copper. That's a definite thing. There's no question about that. That's been measured. In fact, they've measured the rates of drying on different substrates, like an acrylic ground as compared to a lead white ground and compared to copper. And of course, copper just dries, everything dries faster in terms of oil paint. So there's no question about that. And again, you may be able to varnish earlier. We recommend, but
what?
We just didn't tell you to do that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're not telling you to do that, but you may be able to do that. But don't come back to us and say you said that. So.
But what we do want to tell you, we will have very exciting weekend coming, and so Anton, I do want you to talk about Artefex and the Vision X, and so
Vision X Live.
Vision X Live.
Yeah.
About
Yes.
your ambassadors, and then George will talk about natural pigments sessions too there. So that's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have any questions like transferring anything like that, we do have some ambassadors that work on our specifically on copper. We have some featured artists. So anything like that, I would suggest messaging us on our social media. Message us directly. You can email us, and we can direct you some of these artists. And they're usually very helpful. And that's part of the reason why we have ambassadors is that we have a range of artists that use all the different panels we have, and then that way it's not just the manufacturer talking about it, but actually experienced artists who work on it daily. In terms of Vision X Live, starting on Friday, There's a Vision X Live convention. This is the first year that they're doing it. It's a whole range of artists talking about all different kinds of things. For us, we're going to have a session on Friday, on Saturday, and on Sunday. All three are done with either our featured artists or ambassadors. So on Friday, we're going to have a talk. Let me see. On Friday, it is at July 16th at 5 p.m. We're going to be talking to Olga Kremon, specifically about copper. We're actually going to go over a lot of the things we discussed here earlier, but also going to go into her technique on copper. And then she has some experiences painting on different kinds of copper surfaces. So we're going to delve deeper into that a little bit, some of the differences between those. Then on Saturday, we're going to have Suchitra Bosley, who's actually a recent ambassador for our brand, so she uses us exclusively. Suchitra at 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, going to be talking about choosing the right surfaces. So this is mostly, she works specifically on lead-primed linen panels. She's going to talk about understanding all those different surfaces. And actually, we're going to show some of our preliminary results that we have on warping, expansion, contraction, and some of the things that we've seen. We're not going to name any specific names of any competitors or anything like that, but there's going to be a whole range of different panels that are very common out there, and share some of those results for the first time there. And then the third day, which is the Sunday at 12 p.m. Pacific time, and I'm just going to say this is all Pacific time, Pacific Standard Time. So we're going to have Casey Childs, who's an ambassador for our brand. Casey also uses our linen panels, and he's going to be talking about large panels, large ACM panels, and his experience with how big can ACM panels get, what's the best time to switch to canvases, because that's the best time, for really large works. That's what you can do, and then understanding some of the benefits of using rigid supports for large panels. And in that time, we're also going to discuss a little bit about some of the findings we've had on the testing that we've done. So that's the Vision X Live. The best way to view those is to go to the visionxlive.com. Event. You could go through our social media. So if you go to our social media, you can find all that information on there as well. It's the most recent post that we have on there. And then during this time, for the next until the end of July, we're going to be offering a 20% discount on any copper panels. So this is any custom copper panels. So I know Natural Pigments is going to have a discount on standard panels, but for us, through Artefex, if you go to artefex.biz, you'll be able to, when you fill out the custom panel form, if you just type in there copper 20, you can get a 20% discount on any custom copper panels. This is just exclusively for people who are following here. So just remember, say copper 20 anywhere in the comments. If you don't remember that, you can always call us. We'll and just tell us that you saw it on here. We'll make sure to honor it. But this is for any custom sizes up to 4 feet by 8 feet. You can get a 20%.
And this is for week or to end of the July?
It's until the end of the July.
End of the July. Thank you.
End of July. Yeah.
So
yep.
thank you.
So Natural Pigments and Painting Best Practices also participating in Vision X Live. And we're going to have, again, if you want to know more about that, we recommend going to Vision X with a X letter, live.com. And we are going to be interviewing Joshua Rock about his process and materials, Teresa Oaxaca, life as a painter, or life of a painter, excuse me. And we're also going to be talking to Matt Miller, who recently opened an online school in the Massachusetts area, and talk about his Epiphany Art School, and of course James Robinson, who
Yes.
the Art Academy of St. Paul, Minnesota.
We are honored to have him.
Which is now in its 25th year. It's taught thousands of students, both adults and young people. He's doing some amazing things with young people. He's going to show you some of the examples of some of the young people that have come out through their school. So they teach a very traditional technique, but in a very an excellent way that a lot of young people can get it quite well. So we encourage you to see. These are going to be interviews throughout this 3-day weekend, starting Friday. this Friday to Sunday.
So think it's like painting, not painting, like a portrait society, like idea, yes. So then you can go through sessions. That's how
It's
Visual
all
X
live.
Live. It's all live.
It's a virtual
so
live.
Yes.
And,
So then
so,
you can see
yeah.
a lot of your favorite artists or new artists you never knew, and so that will be interesting to see too. So it's 3 days. Please remember. And now we will give you discount.
So the discount code at the naturalpigments.com that I'm going to show to you right.
Please remember, it's only on United States. I apologize for
So
that.
that is for any standard size copper panel available on naturalpigments.com. And from the naturalpigments.com, not of course our Canadian website. You can order from outside the U.S., of course, through naturalpigments.com. That is the discount code. Copper 2021 is the discount code. I'll just keep it there. Sorry, Anton.
All good. All good.
I'm going to move it right up there. There we go. And so that's the discount code there. You can get 20% off. Give us about an hour so that goes into effect. But we'll have that available to the end of the month also. So if you want to try any one of these, the copper CCM, and again, this a lot of advantages of copper, the CCM, because it's a lot less weight, and because of course it's a very thin veneer on a supported structure. That we know is excellent. So it's a lot less weight than buying a suitable copper plate that's going to be very heavy, obviously going to be very expensive. And so there's lots of advantages to CCM, and we see a lot of artists already starting to use that. So it's a lot of work being produced on it. It's very exciting.
So, George, can you tell me the discount will be for end of the July or for next week?
I said end of the July.
End of
So
the July.
yes.
Here's end of the July.
Yeah.
And
And then for any international people, so Natural Pigments I know well, but Artefex will honor the 20% discount for any international for custom panels. So we're actually getting a lot of volume now from international artists because there isn't any options for a lot in Europe and Canada for any of these things. So we still offer that for any of those people. Yeah, I just want to say hi, Katrin and Christina and David Casson and Derek Barker. It's nice to seeing you guys, and Linda Whitehead, of course. I'm just looking at some of the names that I'm familiar with. Thank you so much for asking some of the
questions. By the way,
questions.
Linda, to your question, copper pearlescent pigment isn't copper, so it's just it's a special effect pigment that has the appearance of copper. And but there's no copper in it whatsoever. So just to let you know about that. And Gord, thanks for your comments about copper. That's excellent. Gord is an artist in Canada. He's been using our paints for some years, and he's been painting apparently, which I didn't actually know. Gord, you're painting on copper, so that's fantastic. So.
Yes.
I think we've covered most everybody's.
Tammy asked if you prime with lead oil ground, does the negate the fact that oil dry faster on copper?
It still does dry faster. In fact, what's interesting, so if you put an oil ground on copper, will the paint continue to dry as fast as if it was on copper? It will continue to dry as nearly as fast. You don't have to put a real thickness of ground. There is evidence that the copper ions do migrate all the way up through the ground layers into the paint layer. So that yes, it will continue to dry quite fast. Paint does dry fast on lead grounds too. So, and again, a lot of, I just want to make it clear to everybody, we mentioned, because a lot of people I think got a little bit discouraged because we are admonishing people to prime with an oil ground first. We're telling them that's the safest route, but absolutely experiment, and It was done in the past, a very small amount of paintings where they left some of the copper exposed, or they put very thin layers, or they painted directly on the copper.
They didn't have great varnishes then, so now
But
we have.
and of course we've got much better materials now for varnishes that protect the copper. But if you allow the paint to dry well, that paint is going to be rock solid on that surface, and that's, you know, besides the aesthetic appearance of the copper, which is absolutely beautiful, and if allowing allowing some of the copper to exposed is fine. We're saying it's fine. We're just telling you what is best practice always. We're always going to tell you that and recommend the best thing, but please do experiment with different things. And if you have more questions about that, we're always available by phone. You can give us a call.
And Christina, I'm sorry, George, just a second. So Christina, I do understand that your confusion with adhesion on canvas. I mean on copper, because it's completely different surface than canvas. So yes, it's very slippery. It's very different. So you do paint very thin, but in any case, I will send you a couple. Artists who paint on copper, and so you can talk to them and see what you can take from them. So that's specifically Patricia paints so much on Anton's copper, so then I can definitely, she would be happy to help and explain to you what it feels like.
It is a different the feel of copper is obviously going to be very different from painting on a primed surface, obviously, because it's non-absorbent, but a lot of artists find it actually very satisfying. And like Anton mentioned at the beginning, you could actually just rub some oil over the entire surface if you don't intend to prime it, and a very thin layer, and paint right into that. That might help that slippery surface. And of course, abrading the surface is always recommended. So. And the abrasion should be as uniform as possible too, by the way.
And in terms of the slipperiness of the copper surface is actually surprising, and I think if nothing else, if you're just curious about it, it'd be before you get something large or maybe try a 5x7 panel, something small, just to understand what it feels like painting on it. A lot of artists, especially ones that have never painted on copper, when they first start painting on it, they're a little bit surprised about the surface tension of the copper and how it actually isn't as slippery as one would think. Of course, a lot slipperier than like a medium weave canvas or something like that, but it's not as slippery as some would think, especially with how shiny the whole surface is. So I would suggest, if that is something that you're not used to and you want to explore, I'd get something a smaller 5x7 panel or something like that. Maybe in conjunction, maybe if you get a big panel, but also get a small panel. So that way you have a little bit of time to practice and really understand what the surface feels like, and to see if maybe you want to prime it, maybe you want to instead sand it, which some people do that as well. So you could do that. And actually, now that I'm talking about sanding, I noticed that there was a question quite a while back, and I'm not sure exactly who asked it, but I do want to address it. We did used to have a sandblasted version of the panel, and someone asked if it's ready to paint on. Yes, that one is absolutely ready to paint on. Okay, so just we don't offer it anymore, but it is something that's ready to paint out of the box. So if you have a sandblasted version, old sandblasted version of our copper panel, you can get that as well.
And Clara, the Artefex panels will be available in Canada. Artefex are way behind because they have so many orders, and so Anton works literally 16 hours a day. So, and his employees too. So then. He is preparing the palette for Canada, probably, Anton, what we were talking about end of the July, but it probably a little bit longer. Yes, what do you think? So August probably. Let's say August. Let's say August. It will be available on the Canadian site. Yes.
Or naturalpigments.ca.
Yeah.
Craig Berry is asking, what adhesive are you using to mount the ACM? I'm not sure I understand if you're referring to the CCM, where the copper is thermally bonded to the polystyrene core, so we don't do any mounting there. So that's how we get the panels, and then we cut it to size and so forth. But other than that, there's not really any kind of adhesive used in that particular way. And thanks, Virgil, for your comment, for offering a recommendation on smooth surfaces like copper. The brushes that work the best are soft-haired brushes, sables, oxhair, and perhaps some softer synthetics. That's a good comment. Thank you for that. That's very, very true. Okay, Craig, that was great. We got your question. And by the way, Clara, tempera grassa, we don't recommend that on copper, mainly because, again, any water-based products will promote further oxidation, maybe some acidity and so forth. So tempera grassa, of course, is an water-oil emulsion. We don't really, just oil paint is all we're recommending for copper painting at this particular time.
I think we've
answered
almost
everybody.
everything. If we didn't, we apologize. So then you can call us, you can write us. So we would be happy to assist you. And thank you, Anton. Thank you, George.
Thanks, Anton.
And thank you very much again being with us. Remember, George's session will be not on July 21st, but on July 28th. And cohorts will be on July 31st. Please, people who from 2012, if you at least, once were in our classes, we love to see you in our sessions on last Saturdays of the month on painting best practices. Thank you very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you very much.